wanted to learn game dev for a long time. I like art, music, programming, storytelling, and games bring all of these different hobbies together. I've been doing an Unreal Engine 5 course in my free time, which has been great, but everyone knows that the only way to escape tutorial hell is to build a project of your own. That is, don't follow one series click for click and build the same project that they do. Define your own project parameters and use different tutorials as needed to reach that goal that you've set. Also, I watch a lot of YouTube content about indie game development, and a common piece of advice is to develop tiny games. Go through the whole process of creating a project, implementing all the functions that you need, creating or importing assets like models, UI assets, music and sound, package the build, and release it on a platform like itch.io. So that was my goal. Ultimately, my aim is to build a couch co-op game that I can play with my wife. So I tried to think of the simplest two-player game that I could, which would include some of the elements that I might want to include in that couch co-op game in the future. My solution was Noughts and Crosses, or tic-tac-toe. See, we've recently been replaying some Overcooked 2, trying to 4-star some of the easier levels. My Noughts and Crosses game was inspired by some of the key features of that game. So we have 2 players, 1 overhead camera, and blocks that players interact with. If I was going to make this micro project, I would need to break the game into key pieces and implement them one at a time. First was getting 2 player characters controlled by the keyboard and my Xbox controller. Simple. Next, I needed to implement the box interaction. I started by just making sure that the box could see which player was trying to interact with it. That way, it would be able to spawn an X or an O depending on the player. It could also show them a prompt about which button to press, the E key for the keyboard player and the A key for the Xbox controller player. At this point, I went ahead and modeled my X's and O's in Blender just to get them in the scene. And it was at this point that I realized that I really do not understand UE5's material workspace. The next functionality was a winning condition. I've seen at least one tutorial on YouTube on making Noughts and Crosses, and I didn't really like the way they seem to be implementing it in their game. I didn't really look at it in great detail, but from scrubbing through the video, it just didn't look like what I wanted to do. My solution, which is probably pretty janky, was to just create an array on the game mode blueprint that represents the state of the grid. So the integers of each item in the array take one of 3 values. 0 means the grid cell is empty, a player hasn't put a naught or a cross there. 1 means the grid cell contains a cross, and -1 means the cell contains a naught. Then I set up this very ugly looking boolean that basically checks whether various cell combinations equal 3 or -3, meaning one player has placed 3 of their pieces in a row. So for example, if array items 0, 1, and 2 equal 3, then a cross has been placed in the top row. The next part of the game, of course, is just an end screen that announces which player won and provides the options to play again or quit. And honestly, at this point, I was just keen to wrap this project up. So I implemented the button selection functionality on the UI widget blueprint itself, which I think is bad practice. I think the right thing to do would be to keep all the player controls on the player controller blueprint, which is what it's for, rather than spreading them across different blueprints. But hey, at this point, it just has to work, and it does work. So not only are the controls on the widget blueprint, but the way the controls are implemented might be a bit jank, not sure. So basically the button you have selected is represented by an integer variable on the UI widget blueprint. So it could have been a boolean because it only takes 2 values, but this would make it easier if you wanted to then put extra buttons. So each value represents one of the 2 buttons. It's either 0 or 1. When the player hits the left or right keys, the value flips to the other one, representing that the other button is selected. So that was it. My game was basically done. It had all its functionality in place, or at least I thought it did, until I played and realized that I didn't have a draw condition program, so I had to go back and do that. It was time to make some more assets. I put more detail into my boxes than I really needed. I should have just used normal maps rather than real geometry, and even then you couldn't really see it. but I couldn't be bothered figuring out how to bake normal maps, and they're still really low poly, so it's not a performance cost, I think. Fortunately, I'd already made idle and walking animations for my sloth character in the past, so I didn't need to do any more animation and could just set up the animation blueprint. You've been listening to the soundtrack in this video. I wanted to have this short loop with the kind of clock-like plodding quality because I think that sort of suits puzzle games and like thinking, kind of thinking feeling. I remade all my UI elements in Photoshop, and again, more bad practices here. You really shouldn't hard code your game text into a PNG that you're using as the UI element. I really just wanted to get the game completed, and I had some family who were coming around, and I wanted to subject them to playing the game. So, that was my goal. I think when I was coming back to the game after I'd already packaged it up, I realized that the prompts that show the player which button they should press based on whether they're using the keyboard or the controller assumes that the controller is an Xbox controller, which is the one that I was using. So again, it's probably not a problem because really the only people who are going to play this are the family members of mine that I subject to this experience, and they will be using my Xbox controller. So the prompts will work perfectly for them and look great. But if you came along with a PlayStation controller or some other generic controller, they wouldn't make sense. I decided to jazz up my environment a little bit by creating special wall pieces to sit behind the nought and cross player to indicate which player they were. Added some palm trees because I love palm trees and some little ferns that I already had. And then I packaged the game up and made my itch.io page. I then decided to try the game on my old laptop, in part just to see whether there were any, like what the installation looked like on a different system so that I could write the installation instructions. And I also wanted to run the game on my laptop so that I could plug it into my TV in the living room when I make my family play it. And then it was at this point that I discovered that the game ran like trash on a lower end system, despite being super duper simple. And I thought, oh no, it's true what they say about UE5 and UE5 developers. I'm part of the problem, it's me, oh my God. I then watched a heap of interviews about all the features that I could disable and was able to get the game running much more smoothly on my laptop. The version that I've left on itch.io is just the one that does not perform but looks much prettier. So that's about it. My first tiny game is done and packaged and downloadable on itch.io. It's been a good experience. It's given me a list of things that I know I need to learn about, like materials and shaders, UI elements, and most importantly, optimization and performance within UE5. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any resources on UE5 optimization, please let me know. YouTube searching is absolute garbage these days, so it can be hard to find obscure resources without doing serious digging. So if you've got any hidden gems, help a man out and share them here. And if you're learning UE5, I would love to hear any wisdom you've gained that you can impart on a starter like me. And that's it for now. See you later. Bye.